The rain struck the stained glass windows of St. Helena's Cathedral like thousands of tiny fists, each drop scattering light across the marble floor in fractured colors. Somewhere beyond the heavy doors, a string quartet was tuning their instruments, the melody soft and elegant, the perfect soundtrack for a perfect wedding. Except I was the bride, and I couldn't breathe. I stood before the full-length mirror in the bridal preparation room, wrapped in silk and lace, so flawless it looked painted onto my body. The dress was hand-stitched by a designer from Paris, chosen by my mother months ago. My reflection stared back at me, beautiful and lifeless like a mannequin draped in someone else's dream. Beneath the polished surface, panic simmered, a steady thrum in my chest. This isn't right. I told myself, this isn't who I am. My hands trembled as I clutched the bouquet of white roses. Their scent was too sweet, too heavy. I could already hear the murmur of 300 guests taking their seats, the polite laughter, the rustle of designer gowns. My parents had turned what should have been a ceremony of love into a performance of power. To them, my marriage to Liam Sterling, heir to a real estate empire, wasn't about happiness, it was about legacy, the union of two names that would strengthen both empires. I had been the final piece of their lifelong chess match, the move that would secure their victory. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. My mother entered, regal in champagne silk, her diamond earrings catching the light. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You look divine." "Darling," she said, brushing a stray curl from my cheek. "The photographer wants a few more pictures before we begin. Your father's waiting to walk you down the aisle in 15 minutes. Mom," I whispered, my throat tight. "I need to talk to you." "Not now." "Emily," she said briskly, "whatever it is can wait. We have a schedule." "Sweetheart, everything has to be perfect." Her words felt like chains tightening around my lungs. "I can't do this," I said, barely audible. Her smile faltered. "What did you just say? I can't marry him." I repeated, louder this time, "I don't love him." For a moment, silence. Then her expression hardened. "Emily Hayes, don't you dare ruin this. Not after everything we've done to make this day happen. You're just nervous." "It's not nerves." I insisted. "It's love," she interrupted with a brittle laugh. "Love comes later. Marriage first. Love second. That's how the world works. You'll learn." Her tone was steel wrapped in velvet. I'd heard that voice my entire life, the one that brooked no argument. But this time, something inside me rebelled. The image in the mirror blurred as tears welled in my eyes. "I'm disappearing." "Mom," I whispered, and I don't even recognize myself anymore. Her jaw tightened. "Pull yourself together. You are 26 years old and blessed beyond measure. This marriage is your duty to your family, to your future. Now fix your face and be ready in 10 minutes. She left without another word, the door clicking shut like the sound of a lock turning. I stood there motionless, the music from the cathedral swelling on the other side of the wall. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear the violin's gentle notes. For a moment, I thought I might faint. Then a single, reckless thought sliced through the chaos. Run! It was absurd. Impossible, and yet it was the only thing that made sense. Before I could second-guess myself, I tore the veil from my hair, diamonds scattering like raindrops across the floor. I grabbed my phone and a small clutch from the vanity. The window, my only chance, was narrow. The glass painted with saints who seemed to watch in judgment. I pushed the latch, ignoring the crack of breaking nails. It groaned open, and a gust of cold rain hit my face. I didn't think. I climbed onto the window seat, hiked up the layers of fabric, and slipped through the opening. The lace caught on the stone frame, ripping with a sound that felt like freedom. The drop was farther than I expected. I landed hard on the wet grass, pain shooting up my ankle, but adrenaline drowned everything else. I ran. The rain drenched me instantly, soaking the silk until it clung to my skin. The bouquet fell from my hand, petals scattering like ghosts behind me. My bare feet slapped against the pavement as I stumbled into the cathedral's side garden. Then, toward the parking lot, my heart was a drumbeat of fear and exhilaration. Behind me, shouts erupted. The doors burst open. I heard my name, my mother's voice, sharp as glass echo across the courtyard. Emily, I didn't look back. Rows of luxury cars lined the lot, sleek and polished even under the storm. And then I saw a black Mercedes parked near the edge, its engine still running. I didn't think, didn't plan. I just yanked the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. For a moment, there was only silence, the rhythmic hiss of rain on the roof, the sound of my ragged breathing. Then a deep voice from the front seat said, calm but edged with surprise, well, this is unexpected. I froze. Slowly, I looked up. The man behind the wheel had dark hair damp from the rain, a strong jawline, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a tailored black suit, but there was nothing polished about his expression. He looked alive, alert, curious. I'm sorry, I gasped. I needed to hide. Please. I'll leave in a minute. Are you being chased? His tone was measured, but his eyes flicked toward the cathedral. Through the rain-smeared window, I saw figures spilling out of the doors, my parents, Liam, and the guests, confusion spreading like wildfire. Yes, I whispered, but please don't call anyone. I just need time to think. His gaze returned to me, studying the ruined wedding dress, the mud on my feet, the tears streaking my makeup. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he reached over and pressed the lock button. Hold on, he said simply. Before I could respond, he shifted the car into gear and pulled away from the curb. The cathedral disappeared behind us in a blur of rain and headlights. My breath caught in my throat as the city swallowed us, the sound of sirens fading into the distance. I turned to look out the rear window, half expecting to see my mother running after the car. But there was only darkness and rain. When I finally looked back, the man's eyes met mine in the mirror. You just ran away from your wedding. He said quietly. It wasn't a question. I nodded, my pulse still racing. I couldn't go through with it. He was silent for a while, hands steady on the wheel. Good for you. He said finally, thanks, Gus. That surprised me. Most people would call it madness. Madness and courage often look the same. He said, a hint of a smile ghosting across his lips. What's your name, Emily? I said softly. Emily Hayes. He nodded once. Nathan Ross. The name hit me like static. Nathan Ross. The Nathan Ross, founder of Ross Industries, the self-made billionaire my parents had spent years trying to introduce me to. He was the one who had politely declined every invitation. The one my mother had once called the man too arrogant to see opportunity when it's right in front of him. And now I was sitting in his car in a soaked wedding dress. Oh, God, I murmured, burying my face in my hands. This is insane, he chuckled, low and quiet. Probably, but sometimes insane is exactly what saves us. I looked at him then, really looked, the steady eyes, the calm voice, the way he didn't demand explanations or tell me to turn around. For the first time all day, I felt safe. Why are you helping me? I asked. He kept his gaze on the road, because I know what it's like to feel trapped in a life that looks perfect from the outside but feels like a cage on the inside. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The truth of his words settled over me like a blanket. I leaned my head against the cool glass, watching the city fade into darkness, and whispered, I don't know where I'm going. Then you're exactly where you're supposed to be. He said, we'll figure it out. Outside. The storm raged on. But inside that car, for the first time in years, I felt the faint, trembling spark of freedom. The drive felt endless. The city lights faded behind us, replaced by the blur of dark highways and the rhythmic hum of rain against the windshield. I sat curled in the passenger seat, drenched, silent, trying to steady my breathing. My mind was a whirlwind, my parents' furious faces, the gasps from the guests, Liam's stunned expression. I had blown up an entire life in a single hour. Nathan didn't speak much. He seemed to sense I couldn't handle conversation. His calm was unnerving, but also strangely comforting. Every few minutes, I'd glance at him, his focus, his quiet control, the faint muscle ticking in his jaw. I wondered what he must think of me, a stranger in a ruined wedding dress who had invaded his car and turned his night upside down. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, the car had stopped. I blinked groggily as Nathan turned off the engine. Outside, dawn was just beginning to gray the sky. We were no longer in the city. Instead, an expanse of forest stretched around us, tall pines heavy with mist, the air sharp with the scent of rain and earth. Ahead stood a house, built of stone and glass, rising out of the hillside like something both wild and deliberate. Where are we? I asked. My voice raw. My place. Nathan said, unbuckling his seatbelt. Upstate. No one knows. I come here. You'll be safe. Safe. The word felt foreign. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear it until that moment. He got out, came around, and opened my door. When I tried to stand, pain shot through my ankle. I winced, stumbling, and Nathan caught my arm before I could fall. You're hurt, he said, his brow furrowing. It's nothing. Just twisted it. When I hesitated, a humorless laugh escaping. When I jumped out of a window, one corner of his mouth lifted. In a wedding dress, you might be the bravest person I've met. Or the craziest. Sometimes they're the same thing, he said softly. Inside, the house was breathtaking, wide open spaces filled with light, polished wood floors, tall windows that framed the forest outside. But unlike the sterile mansions I'd grown up in, this place felt real. There were books stacked on tables, a half-finished cup of coffee near the fireplace, a worn leather jacket tossed over a chair. It was lived in, human. Sit down, Nathan said, guiding me to a sofa near the fire. I'll get you something dry and check that ankle. I sank into the cushions, the exhaustion finally catching up to me, My dress was heavy with rainwater, clinging to my skin. I had never felt so small, so lost, and yet in this strange house. I wasn't terrified. Maybe because for the first time in years, no one was telling me what to do. Nathan returned a few minutes later with a stack of clothes, soft gray sweatpants, and a black sweater far too big for me. There's a bathroom through that door. He said, "Take your time." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. In the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized myself. My hair hung in wet tangles, my mascara smudged into shadows beneath my eyes. The perfect bride had vanished, replaced by someone raw and real. I peeled off the soaked gown, layer by layer, until it pooled at my feet like the ghost of a life I'd just escaped. Then I slipped into Nathan's clothes. They were warm and smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. For the first time since morning, I could breathe. When I returned, Nathan had built a fire. He sat on the floor beside the coffee table, a first aid kit open in front of him. "Come here," he said, motioning for me to sit. "Let's see that ankle." I hesitated, but he looked up, meeting my eyes. His expression wasn't pitying, it was patient, gentle. I limped over and sat. His hands were warm and steady as he examined the swelling, not broken. He said, after a moment, "Just a bad sprain. I'll wrap it. You sound like you've done this before." I murmured, "Long story." He replied with a faint smile. I wasn't always sitting in boardrooms. He wrapped the bandage carefully, his fingers brushing my skin. The intimacy of the moment made my pulse quicken. For so long, every touch in my life had been calculated, a handshake for status, a photo pose for the press, a kiss that looked good in public, but this was different. Simple, human. There, Nathan said, "Finishing the bandage? Try not to move too much for a few days. Thank you." I said quietly, "For all of this, you keep saying that." He said, "You don't need to. I don't even know why you're being kind to me." He leaned back against the sofa, studying the fire. "Because I know what it's like to almost make a mistake that defines your entire life." I looked at him, surprised. "You do?" He nodded slowly. "Years ago, I was engaged. Her name was Claire. Our families thought it was perfect. She came from money. Her father owned half the banks in the city, and it would have been a merger more than a marriage. I convinced myself I was happy until I wasn't. What happened, I ended it a week before the wedding. His tone was even, but his eyes were distant. Everyone hated me for it. Her family, Mina, the investors tied to both, but it was the best decision I ever made. Sometimes walking away isn't failure, it's survival." I swallowed hard. My parents will never see it that way. They don't have to. He said, "You just have to live with yourself." That truth sank deep into me. I had spent my entire life trying to make my parents proud, every choice shaped by what would look best, sound best, photograph best. But in that moment, sitting in front of a crackling fire with a man who owed me nothing, I realized how hollow that pride had been. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the fire popping and the rain easing against the windows. Then Nathan stood. "Are you hungry? I make a decent omelet." The offer startled a laugh out of me, my first real laugh in what felt like forever. "Sure," I said. "Why not?" He moved into the kitchen, and I watched him from the sofa. There was something soothing about the way he worked, methodical, calm. He cracked eggs, chopped vegetables, hummed under his breath. It felt absurdly domestic, and yet comforting in its simplicity. For years, my meals had been prepared by caterers and chefs. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten food made by someone's hands simply because they cared. When he returned with 2 plates, I realized how hungry I was. The omelet was warm and perfectly cooked. Okay, I said, between bites, you win. It's actually really good. I told you. He said, smiling faintly, I live alone a lot. You learn a few things. Something in his voice tugged at me, loneliness, maybe, or recognition. We ate in companionable silence. For the first time since I'd run, the panic in my chest began to fade. After we finished, I leaned back and stared into the fire. I don't know what I'm gonna do, I said softly. I've burned every bridge I had. Then we'll build new ones. Nathan said simply, the word shouldn't have meant so much, but it did. I looked at him, this stranger who had appeared at the exact moment I needed someone most. I didn't know his story. Not really. I didn't know why he'd chosen to help me, but as the firelight flickered over his face, I felt a strange certainty settle in my chest, like the world had tilted just enough to align 2 paths that were never meant to meet, but somehow had. Thank you, I whispered again, meaning it in ways I couldn't explain. Nathan met my eyes, and for a heartbeat, the air between us shifted. Something unspoken, past, fragile, dangerous, real. You're safe here. Emily, he said softly, rest tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest. As he stood and turned off the lights, I lay back against the sofa, listening to the rhythm of rain outside and the steady crackle of fire. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trapped by expectation or fear. I was nowhere, belonging to no one, and yet somehow it felt like the beginning of everything. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the tall windows, warm against my face. For a brief, blissful moment, I forgot where I was. Then the memories came rushing back: the cathedral, the rain, my mother's voice, Nathan's car. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. I had really done it. I had run away from my own wedding. Nathan was in the kitchen when I limped in, dressed casually in a gray shirt and jeans. He looked up, offering me a small smile. Morning. How's the ankle better? I said, easing into a chair. And how's your morning after rescuing a runaway bride? Peaceful, he said lightly. No reporters in the driveway yet. So I'd say we're winning. That word reporters made my stomach twist. Do you think it's already in the news? He gave me a look. You ran from a cathedral packed with New York's elite. Emily, by now, it's everywhere. I reached for my phone, still in my clutch. When I turned it on, it nearly exploded with notifications, hundreds of missed calls, texts, emails. My parents, Liam, friends, even numbers I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages. From my mother, Emily, this is disgraceful. Come home immediately. We can still fix this if you cooperate. From my father, you've humiliated this family beyond repair. From Liam, please call me. I need to understand. And then, buried among the fury, one message from my younger sister. Sophie, Mads, everyone's losing their minds. But honestly, I'm kind of proud of you. You did what I never thought you'd dare. Be safe. Call me when you can. I let out a shaky laugh that turned into tears. Sophie always understood, even when we were kids. She was the only one who saw me, the real me. Nathan set a cup of coffee in front of me. You don't have to look through all of that right now. I have to, I said, wiping my eyes. I can't hide forever. He nodded, sitting across from me. Then let's make a plan. A plan, step 1. He said, calm and practical. You need control of your own finances. Any accounts your parents manage, close them. Open a new one under your own name. At a bank they don't use. Step 2, you'll need a place to stay. You're welcome here as long as you want. I looked up sharply. Nathan, I can't stay here forever. I didn't say forever. He replied, just long enough to breathe. You need time to figure things out before you make big decisions. The simplicity of his offer made something in me ache. No strings. Not conditions. Just space, something I'd never been given before. After breakfast, I texted Sophie I'm safe. Don't tell anyone where I am. I'll explain soon. Her reply came almost instantly. Promise I won't. Just be careful. Mom's furious. Dad's pretending not to care, which means he's planning something. I wasn't surprised. My father, Richard Hayes, didn't shout when he was angry. He planned. He strategized. His silence was always more dangerous than his words. By that evening, I found out what he'd planned. Nathan and I were sitting near the fire again when my phone rang my father's number. My hands trembled as I answered. Dad, his voice was cold. Emily, I'm relieved you're alive. Beyond that, I don't know what to say. Maybe start with why you think I owed you a wedding. I said before I could stop myself, you owed your family stability. He snapped. Liam's family is threatening legal action. The press won't stop calling. Our business partners are reconsidering deals. Do you even understand what you've done? I did what I had to do. I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I couldn't marry someone I didn't love. Love. He almost spat the word. Love doesn't pay for penthouses or fun galleries. Love doesn't build empires. You've always been too sentimental for your own good. I'm not sentimental. I'm human. I whispered, then you can start living like one. He said, his voice turning sharp. As of this morning, your credit cards are canceled. Your trust fund is frozen, and your apartment lease will not be renewed. You wanted independence. Emily, you have it. The call ended before I could respond. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, staring at the fire. Nathan's voice was quiet. What did he say? I swallowed hard. He cut me off. Completely, Nathan's eyes softened, but his tone stayed steady. Then we'd build from scratch. I have nothing, I said, the words breaking in my throat. No home, no income, no family. You have yourself. He interrupted, and that's more than you think. I tried to smile, but the tears came anyway. Nathan moved to sit beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. You're not alone. Emily, I looked at him through blurred vision. Why do you care so much? He hesitated, then said, because I know what it feels like to lose everything and still have to keep going. Something in his eyes told me there was a story behind that, a story he wasn't ready to share. I didn't push. The next few days passed in a haze. I spent hours researching jobs, trying to figure out what I could actually do. My degree in art history, dismissed by my parents as impractical, suddenly seemed like the only thing I truly owned. I had always loved art, the quiet power of it, the way it told truth without permission. But I'd never been allowed to make it my path. One afternoon, Nathan found me hunched over my laptop. "You've been at this for hours." He said, "Any luck?" "Not really." I admitted, apparently, being the daughter of Richard Hayes doesn't impress people when you're applying for entry-level positions. He smiled faintly. "That's probably a good thing." I gave him a look. "You sound suspiciously pleased about that." "I am," he said. "You're finally being seen for you, not for your last name." His words stuck with me long after he left the room. That night, as I lay awake in the guest bedroom, I thought about all the choices I'd never made, schools picked for prestige, friends chosen for influence, even my hobbies curated for appearances. My life had been a script written by someone else. And for the first time, I was holding the pen. The following morning, I opened my laptop and typed graduate programs in art history. My heart pounded as I scrolled through universities, reading about research opportunities and scholarships. It felt reckless, impossible, and yet right. When I told Nathan over breakfast, he didn't laugh or question it. He just said, "Apply, even if you don't get in. It's a start. You think I could actually do it. I think you already are doing it." He said, "You're taking your life back." The simplicity of that statement nearly undid me. I had been waiting my entire life for someone to believe in me, not the perfect version, not the obedient daughter, but me. Later that day, the media frenzy reached full force. Nathan's phone buzzed constantly with calls from journalists, trying to confirm whether the elusive billionaire was harboring the runaway bride. He ignored them all. Unbothered. They'll get bored soon enough. He said, "Scandals always burn out." But my parents wouldn't. Their anger wasn't temporary, it was legacy-level fury. Still, I couldn't bring myself to regret what I'd done. Every time I looked out the window at the quiet stretch of forest, I felt something I'd never known before, peace. One night, as rain tapped softly against the glass, I sat with Nathan by the fire again. "Do you ever wish you'd done things differently?" I asked. He looked thoughtful. "Every day." He admitted, but not because of what I lost, because of how long it took me to realize what mattered. And what's that freedom? Purpose. The right to make mistakes that are actually yours. I smiled faintly. "That sounds terrifying." "It is," he said, "but it's also the only way to live." We sat in silence for a long time, the warmth of the fire between us. I thought about the girl I'd been a week ago, terrified, obedient, hollow, and the woman sitting here now, still scared but alive in a way she'd never been before. When I finally went upstairs, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My hair was messy, my sweater too big, my ankle still bandaged. But for the first time, I recognized a person staring back at me. I was Emily Hayes, and I wasn't running anymore. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. After the chaos, silence felt strange, almost fragile, like it could shatter if I moved too quickly. Nathan kept his promise. He gave me space. But somehow, he was always there when I needed him. Each morning, he'd hand me a cup of coffee and ask the same thing. "What's the plan today?" "Emily." At first, I never had an answer. But slowly, I began waking early, sitting by the wide windows of his study, researching graduate programs and writing application essays. During the day, I searched for art-related jobs, anything that could prove I was capable of standing on my own. And every evening, Nathan would check in not to judge, not to guide, but simply to listen. It was strange, that kind of freedom. No one telling me what to wear, how to smile, what impression to make. I was beginning to feel like a person, not a project. One morning, while I was reviewing a draft of my application to Columbia, Nathan appeared in the doorway, holding his laptop. "I have a proposition," he said. "That sounds ominous," I replied, glancing up. He smiled faintly. "One of my companies acquires and authenticates art for private collectors and corporate spaces. We're short on researchers who understand art history and provenance. You'd be perfect." My hands froze on the keyboard. "You're offering me a job?" "Yes. Remote, flexible, real work. You'd be paid fairly." Not pitied. I stared at him. "Nathan, I don't want charity." "It's not charity," he said, his voice calm. "You're qualified. You have a sharp eye and a passion for detail. I need someone like that on the team." I hesitated, studying his expression. He meant it. No ulterior motive. And no expectation. Just an opportunity? "Okay," I said finally, "I'll do it." Nathan's smile widened. Warm and genuine. "Good. Welcome to the team, Miss Hayes." The first week was a blur of documents, databases, and art catalogs. I learned to identify forgeries, verify ownership records, and trace the histories of forgotten paintings. It was work that demanded focus, and for the first time in years, I loved what I was doing. Each discovery felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Nathan treated me like an equal. He'd occasionally drop by my workspace to ask for updates, but he never hovered. Sometimes he'd bring coffee, other times a quiet smile. He trusted me to manage my work, and that trust changed everything. Still, there was tension and unspoken pull between us. I tried to ignore. It lived in the moments our eyes met across the table, in the way his voice softened when he said my name, in the quiet pauses that stretched too long to be accidental. I told myself it was gratitude, that the warmth I felt whenever he smiled was nothing more than relief. But I knew better. One evening, after a long day of work, I found Nathan on the terrace overlooking the hills. The sun was sinking behind the trees, painting the sky gold and violet. He was leaning against the railing, sleeves rolled up, a glass of wine in his hand. "You should take a break," he said as I joined him. "You've been staring at that laptop for 10 hours. "I like it," I said. "For once, the work feels like mine." He nodded slowly. "You seem lighter, happier." I smiled. "Maybe I am." He looked at me then, and something shifted in his expression, something softer, deeper. "You know, I wasn't sure you'd stay that first night. I thought you'd leave the next morning." "Why?" "Because most people panic when they realize freedom isn't a vacation." He said, "It's work, hard work." I laughed quietly. "You're not wrong. I've had more meltdowns than I'd like to admit. But you stayed." He said, "That says something." "What does it say?" "That you're braver than you think." His voice was low, and the air between us felt suddenly fragile. I turned away, pretending to admire the view, though my pulse was hammering. "Thank you for everything," I said softly. "You didn't have to help me." He took a slow sip of wine, eyes still on me. "Maybe not, but I wanted to." The conversation lingered in my mind long after he went inside. I knew I was crossing dangerous ground. Falling for the man who had saved me was the oldest mistake in the book. But how could I not? Nathan had given me more than safety. He'd given me the chance to become someone I actually liked. A few days later, I had my first small victory. A local museum offered me a part-time position in their archives, organizing records, cataloging pieces. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. When I told Nathan, he grinned like it was the best news he'd heard all week. That's incredible. He said, "You're building your own path. Emily, you should be proud." It felt good to be proud of something that wasn't measured in headlines or dinner invitations. That night, we celebrated with dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and wine in the kitchen. But the atmosphere felt different, lighter, more intimate. I teased him about his cooking skills, and he laughed. An unguarded, genuine laugh that made my chest ache. As I reached across the counter to hand him a plate, our fingers brushed. The touch was brief but electric. I froze. Breath caught. He didn't move either, for a heartbeat. We just looked at each other, the kind of look that says everything words can't. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should eat before it gets cold, right?" I said quickly, my cheeks burning. We didn't talk about it, but after that night, something subtle changed. The distance between us grew smaller, the air heavier. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes I'd linger a little too long in the doorway before leaving his study. I told myself I wasn't ready, that I needed to rebuild myself first. But every time his voice softened on my name, every time he smiled like I was more than just a guest, it became harder to believe my own excuses. One night, near the end of the month, I was working late when my phone buzzed. It was Sophie. "Mom's still furious. Dad says if you don't come home, they'll make sure you're written out of every trust and company record." I stared at the message, feeling the familiar weight of fear pressed down on my chest. Then I looked around the quiet house. The documents spread across the table, the life I was building here, and I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I texted back, "Then so be it. I'm finally okay." I put my phone down and went to the window. The night outside was still and dark, the stars scattered across the sky. I hadn't seen stars like that in years, not through city glass or penthouse haze. I didn't hear Nathan approach until he was beside me. "Can't sleep, too much on my mind." I said, "Old ghosts." He nodded. "They take time to fade." We stood in silence for a moment, watching the night. Then he said quietly, "I'm proud of you." "You know, for what? For choosing yourself. That's harder than people think." I looked up at him, his face half lit by moonlight. "You make it sound brave." "It is," he said simply. Something inside me broke open, then not in pain, but in recognition. I didn't want to keep pretending. I didn't want to keep hiding behind gratitude and fear. I wanted him, the man who had seen me at my worst and never once asked me to be anything other than myself. I opened my mouth to speak, but he gently shook his head. "Not yet." He said softly, as if he could read my thoughts, "You're still building your life. Don't lose yourself in me before you finish finding yourself." It should have hurt. Instead, it made me love him more. When he left the room, I stayed by the window, my heart full and heavy all at once. I wasn't sure what the future held, school, work, or whatever this thing between us might become. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was rebuilding brick by brick, piece by piece. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to start living. 6 months after the wedding, my life looked nothing like the one my parents had planned for me. And for the first time, that felt like victory. I had been accepted into Columbia's graduate program in art history with a partial scholarship. I spent mornings buried in books, afternoons at the museum, and evenings working remotely for Nathan's company. Tracing the histories of forgotten paintings, it was exhausting and imperfect and real, and it was mine. I had moved into a tiny studio apartment in the city. The rent was modest, the walls were thin, and the radiator groaned like an old man every night. But it smelled of paint and coffee and freedom. Nathan had helped me move, insisting on carrying every box himself, despite my protests. "You're supposed to let me be independent." I teased. He grinned. "You can be independent after I finish being chivalrous." He still lived upstate, managing his empire from the peace of his hillside home. But he came into the city often for meetings, and sometimes, for me, we never labeled what we were. We didn't need to. We were two people finding our way toward each other at our own pace. One weekend in late autumn, he invited me back to the house for the first time in months. The drive through the hills felt nostalgic, the trees bursting with gold and crimson. When I arrived, the air was cool and sharp with pine. The moment I stepped inside, warmth rushed through me, firelight, the faint scent of cedar, the familiar, quiet hum of the place that had once been my refuge. Nathan met me at the door with that same steady smile. "Welcome home." Home! The word hit me harder than I expected. That night, after dinner, he said he wanted to show me something. We drove in silence until the road curved toward a familiar sight. Helena's Cathedral. My breath caught in my throat. "Why here?" I asked. "You'll see." The church was empty, silent except for the echo of our footsteps on the marble. I hadn't set foot here since the day I ran. My heart pounded as we walked down the aisle, the same aisle I was supposed to walk 6 months ago in a white dress I hadn't chosen. Nathan stopped halfway and turned to me. "I've been thinking about that day," he said quietly. "About the moment you chose yourself. How you climbed out that window instead of surrendering to a life that wasn't yours." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. It doesn't feel brave when I think about it. It feels reckless. He shook his head. It was both. But sometimes reckless is just another word for brave. The colored light from the stained glass fell across his face. Fragments of red and blue and gold. He took a deep breath. "If you hadn't run that day, I never would have met you. I never would have known the woman who changed the way I see everything." My chest tightened. "Nathan," he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught. "Emily Hayes," he said, his voice steady. "I love you. I have loved you since the day you crashed into my car. Terrified and furious and alive. I've waited until now because I wanted to make sure you didn't need saving anymore. I wanted you to stand on your own before I asked this." He opened the box. Inside was a ring simple, elegant, nothing like the one that had once symbolized my cage. A single diamond, slender band, understated and perfect. "Will you marry me?" he asked softly. "Not because you need security, not because anyone expects it, but because you choose it, because you choose me." For a moment, all I could do was stare. My mind flashed with images, the girl in the mirror, trapped beneath silk and fear, the rain-soaked escape, the long nights of rebuilding. Everything that had broken me had led here, to this man standing in the place where I once lost myself. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I nodded. Yes. I whispered 1,000 times. Yes. Nathan's smile broke through. Warm and real. He slid the ring onto my finger and pulled me into his arms. I could feel his heartbeat against mine. Steady and sure. In that cathedral where I had once chosen freedom over fear, I chose love, not the arranged, strategic kind, but the kind that felt like peace. Our wedding, 3 months later, was the opposite of everything my first almost wedding had been. There were no cameras, no business partners, no grand displays, just a handful of people who mattered. Sophie stood beside me in a soft blue dress, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "You actually did it." Nathan's sister, Julia, officiated the ceremony in the garden behind his house. The air smelled of pine and earth, and the late spring sunlight turned everything golden. When it was my turn to speak, I looked at Nathan, this man who had found me when I was lost and never once tried to own me, and I said, "I promise to choose you, not because I need to, but because I want to, every day, for the rest of our lives." He smiled, eyes shining, "And I promise never to let you forget that this life is yours first." Our second, when we kissed, everyone clapped, and Sophie let out a joyful sob that made me laugh through my tears. It wasn't perfect, it was real, and that made it everything. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, we sat by the fire just like we had that first night. The storm outside had been replaced by soft wind rustling the trees. I curled up beside Nathan, his arm around me, my head resting against his chest. "Any regrets?" he asked, his tone teasing but gentle. I smiled into his shirt, only that I didn't jump out that window sooner. He laughed, low and warm. "You realize that's not a line most brides can say. I was never meant to be most brides." He kissed my forehead. "No, you weren't." I looked up at him, at the man who had given me freedom when the world offered cages. "You know, people would think what happened to us is crazy. Maybe," he said, "but maybe crazy is just another word for brave." I laughed softly, the words echoing like truth. We sat there for a long time, watching the fire fade to embers. My hand rested on his chest, right over his heart, feeling its steady rhythm. I thought about the girl who had once been terrified of disappointing everyone, who had measured her worth by approval and perfection. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned that freedom isn't the absence of responsibility, it's the presence of choice. And I had chosen to walk away from the life that glittered but suffocated. I had chosen to start over, to build something uncertain but honest. I had chosen love that asked for nothing but truth. Nathan's breathing slowed as he drifted towards sleep, but I stayed awake a little longer, watching the flicker of firelight on the walls. Sometimes I still thought about my parents. They never forgave me. Not entirely. My father's silence remained. My mother's disappointment lingered in every unanswered message. But Sophie kept me updated, quietly cheering from the sidelines. She said Mom sometimes watched interviews of me, Dr. Emily Hayes, now discussing art restoration projects and women in history who defied expectations. Maybe one day they would understand, and if not, that was okay too. I'd learned that not every story ends with approval or applause. Some just end with peace, and that's enough. As the last log in the fireplace burned low, Nathan stirred, mumbling something, half asleep. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Sleep. I whispered, we've got a whole life to live tomorrow. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain, the same scent from the day everything began. I thought of that girl in the white dress, clutching a bouquet she didn't choose, staring at her reflection in a mirror and realizing she couldn't go through with the lie. I wanted to tell her that the fall through that window would hurt, that the landing would be rough, that she'd lose everything she thought defined her, but I also wanted to tell her that she would find something infinitely better herself. And in finding herself, she'd find the kind of love that doesn't trap, but frees. As I closed my eyes, Nathan's arm tightened around me, and I smiled. Freedom, love, choice. 3 words that once felt impossible, now the foundation of everything. I had been the runaway bride. Now, I was simply Emily Hayes' artist, dreamer, wife, and woman who dared to choose her own life. And I would make that choice again every single day,